right, so very excited for today's conversation. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. One we've not done before. If you've come to some of our events, we've done quite a few events, and this is a new topic, which always makes it really exciting. So the good news is if you've been to a number of events, you get to hear something new today. If you haven't, then it'll all be new to you either way. So we're going to be talking about managing remote teams successfully. So this is going to be a fun conversation. However, it's only going to be successful if you participate. So I made the comment in the beginning, like, turn your video on, collaborate, would love to see you. I invite you to do that if you're comfortable. Remember, when we're talking about remote teams, we're talking about very similar to what we're doing right now, where we're over Zoom or whatever the platform that you use is. So the more that we can see each other's faces and know when there's confusion or know when people are multitasking or distracted, all of these things will help us to be more successful together. I'm also going to be asking a lot of questions because I am a coach and that is what I do. So please engage, type in the chat. Justice got you going with the where are you from. There's going to be a lot of that today. So have your little fingers ready or thumbs, maybe if you're on your phone. If you're eating or you're multitasking and you just can't, that's okay. We would love for you to listen in, but please do participate when you can because it'll make it all that much more successful for everyone. So if you have not been to an event before, just want to talk really quickly about who Ama La Vida is. This is the company that you're enjoying this beautiful event with today. And Justice is in the office. You can see kind of like the lovely backdrop where he's at. So Justice is in Chicago, which is where our happiness hub, our main office is, and where Ama La Vida was founded by these two lovely ladies here, Nicole and Forum. I am in Houston, and all of our other coaches really are spread out all over the world. We are a coaching company. We do leadership, career, life, and health coaching. Today, we're going to be primarily talking about leadership as we're focusing on this, how to manage a remote and successful team. So you kind of get the perspective of, yeah, we're talking about coaching, and that's kind of one of the main goals, and that'll be peppered throughout today. But this workshop will give you also a feel for the types of workshops and events that we facilitate as well, because the idea is we've sort of taken all-encompassing approach, especially with leadership, to do workshops and trainings, group and team coaching, one-on-one coaching, and all of these things together to make sure that you as an individual, but also your team truly does love their life, which is in our name, Ama La Vida, so that we can have successful careers, so we can have happy careers, so that we can enjoy what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's the premise and that's the framework and just kind of our springboard for what we're going to be focusing on today. So I am Jen. I'm the Director of Leadership Solutions here at Ama La Vida. And really just what that means is I get the chance to work with a lot of corporations and a lot of different teams on both designing, developing, and constructing programs that are a good fit for them. For example, we have something called a leadership accelerator that involves workshops and group coaching and one-on-one, but really just working with teams, companies, and in some cases individuals to craft programming that's very specific for them. So if you are a current client, you maybe know my name, you've maybe worked with me in some fashion before. If not, I'm a little bit behind the scenes like Justice, but get the chance to do some great events like this today. All right, so Justice already sort of asked us, hey, where are we from? So if you're just joining us, drop it in the chat. We want to know where you're from, where you're calling in from. The other thing I think is also interesting is what company do you work at? So if you're comfortable and you want to share that, let us know what company you're at, or I'm self-employed. The other thing that's going to be really great for the context of today's conversation is, are you working from home? Are you working in an office? Or are you a remote or hybrid worker, sort of maybe doing both sometimes, but today you're home, today you're in the office, something along those lines. So tell us where you're physically at too. I'm at home. Justice is in the office, although he really gets that hybrid approach and I go where the need is, but really my home office is kind of one and the same for me. But it's good to just kind of see where everyone is. So we've got some working at home, hybrid home today. We usually see a good 50-50 as we go through. That's kind of been the what we're seeing most of the time lately. So a lot of hybrids today. Okay, good. Working from home, transition. There we go. Perfect. We're going to see a lot of that too. Okay, great. So thank you. That's just good to know. It's good for perspective, especially as we're going in talking about remote and virtual today specifically. All right. So I just asked you if you're home or in the office. The other thing I always like to know, are there any current clients on the line? I just saw a quick scrub of the names. I didn't get any, but if you are, give a shout out to your coach, say hello. We always like to know who our members are and who's on the line. So just go ahead and drop that in just so that we know. And if not, that's great. You're going to learn a lot more about Ama La Vida and what we offer today. All right, so here's our agenda. Holy cow, it's massive. The amount of stuff we're going to cover today could probably be done in like a 1 week long training. So I'm going to do my best in 1 hour to squeeze in as much helpful information as possible so that you leave with some nugget that's good for you, whether it's a tool and resource, an approach, a thought, an idea, whatever is going to be the most beneficial for you out of today. Those 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets there are the ones that you may recognize that you saw when you enrolled. And I added a couple other little things, the one big thing you need to know, and then the one more big thing you need to know. So we're going to cover quite a few things today, and I'm going to make sure that I leave enough time for questions and answers at the end. If you have any urgent ones, it's okay to put them in the chat. If they seem really relevant, I will stop and we will make sure we get them answered, but just know that we'll for sure spend some time at the end for Q&A. As you probably saw when you logged in, this is being recorded, so it will be posted on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to go back and reference it again or share it with others if you found there was really great information. But take notes, ask questions, be present, be focused. Like the more you interact, the more that you're going to get out of this. I do have a short bit.ly link on there for our events. If you would like to register for some more events, we have a ton more. There is one. And I don't know, Justice, if it would be easy for you to grab. I think it's in our marketing Slack channel, but there's an event that I'm doing this afternoon with General Assembly at 8 p.m. Central that I would love for some of you to attend as well. If you possibly can do that. I know it's a little bit short term, but it's going to be just a really kind of great continuation of some of the stuff we're talking about today. So if we can dig that link up, we'll drop it in the chat for you. Okay, so the other things I want to just remind you is Justice mentioned this at the very beginning. If you want to have a conversation with someone like Justice to talk a little bit more about how coaching can support you, that is the link to go ahead and get that scheduled. I'm not really going to mention it anymore throughout. So I mentioned it up front. He did. It'll be on a slide at the end as a reminder, but that's pretty much it. So if that, you know that's something that you want to get taken care of and get a time that works for you, go ahead and grab it now. The other thing I want to mention before we dive in, and this is where if you need support, you can even just email me directly, jennifer@albcoaching.com. But one thing that we like to remind individuals of is that you can get your career development sponsored, and many companies will sponsor at least portions of career development. So maybe they only give you $500 to attend a conference, or maybe they give you $3,000 for education. Whatever it is, think about how you can use those funds for something that feels really relevant for you today out of what we're talking about, whether that's coaching, a workshop, who knows. But think about how you can creatively use those funds if you work in an organization that provides that. It's just something that a lot of individuals basically just forget even exists. Okay, here we go. So I want to hear from everyone. This is where you get to start interacting a little bit more. I have a question for you on here. I would love a rating. I'm not going to do a 1 to 5. I'm doing a different rating today, more or less. So would you say you're more effective or less effective at leading your team remotely versus in person? So who would say they're more effective remotely? I mean, I suspect most will say equal or less, but I'd love if there's any more is dropped in the chat. Definitely seeing some lesses. Okay. Those of you who are here not as direct managers, but as leaders, I hope that you'll still consider answering it the same way. But as you're kind of typing in your more or less or same, thank you, Valerie, put into the chat, are you currently a manager or not? And this also just gives me some perspective as well. 9 days, there you go. Kicking it right off, perfect. This is the right way to get started. I love it. Currently a manager, great. More effective remote, that's wonderful. So Jennifer, maybe as we're going through, I'd really love for you to kind of drop in some nuggets of things that work really well, because even our conversation today, think of this a little bit as group coaching. I want all of you to interact in the sense that if you're kind of sharing things that work well for you, we're all going to learn. You don't need to just hear Jen. Jen is not the end all be all expert of everything. So drop in other things for others as we go as well. Current manager, effective at both. Great. This is great. So I'd love, as we're going through, if you feel like I'm either missing something or just something that you think others would benefit from, drop it in the chat as we go. Okay. All right. So here we go. We're going to peel back the onion. What is really the challenge here? When we talk about remote teams and leading remote teams, why is it hard to lead a remote team? So I want to hear, like, what do you think has made managing and leading a remote team hard for you? Those of you especially that said, same or less, or maybe even those of you who said I'm better at it, but it doesn't mean it's not easy. We can be better or good at something and it could still be challenging or hard. So what are the things that make it hard for you to lead a remote team? You'll see I have some things up here just to get some dialogue going and be thinking. Some people might say distance because they're used to being able to turn around and go, oh yeah, hey, Justice, what do you think about this? And Justice isn't there anymore. I'm talking to my hutch instead. So sometimes it's distance, sometimes it's personalities. We have introverts, we have extroverts, a really kind of a hodgepodge of what's going on. Less communication, it's true. It's not as easy to just do like the daily stand-up, or maybe there's a huge effort in order to do it. Collaboration, sometimes we just have a tendency to collaborate more when we're physically near each other or in meetings. I mean, how many times have you gone to a meeting for one topic and, oh, Sally's in this meeting and I really wanted to talk to her about X. Great, fabulous. So now I can have that conversation with Sally too. So it's sort of, by proxy, we get some of it in based off of who's around. Zoom fatigue. Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started. I can relate to that 100%. It's true though. It's true. So there's lots of these little reasons that make it difficult. The other thing I put on here was boundaries, and I'd love to get some perspective from those of you on the line too. What about, hey, we're home all the time, so we're working way longer hours, which maybe means one person is taking a break at a weird time that they wouldn't normally, and then I can't get a hold of them. Like, who's on Slack, who's online, who's offline, the challenges with that. Aria has a great one on here about body language too. When the cameras are off, or when you can only see, maybe this much, like, you don't know what others are doing. Are they, right now I'm actually crossing my arms. You could maybe tell, but technically you can't see it on the camera. So I might look really engaged, but maybe I'm really bored or something, right? So there's so many things that could make it really challenging. Anything else that I want to just say to the people turn cameras off? I know I just mentioned the body language thing, but that's so true. When the camera is off, we really just don't know. Do you remember, and this would have been like years ago, probably, where we would do conference rooms or conference meetings where you've got 20 people in a room right now, and they're all collaborating and they're all conversating and communicating. And then maybe there's 2 or 3 people that dialed in on the phone, and it's, it's on speaker, but it's on mute so that they don't get all the obnoxious background noise. What's happening? Like, we don't really know the tone of their tone, their pace. Like, it's hard to get that sometimes, especially if there's noise in the room. So there could just be so many other distractions. There could be that the venues of which and the ways of which we're connecting are making it so difficult that we're just not able to collaborate. I think it's really important to think about this why piece a little bit, and I'm going to hit at this in the end, but we need to know individually for each and every one of us. Like, it doesn't matter how many facts and statistics or tools and resources or questions that I ask you. You need to know what the challenge is for you, for the challenge of you and your team. If the challenge is, I can't see anyone because the cameras are off, how do you solve that problem? If the challenge is, I can't read body language, how do you solve that problem? If the challenge is Zoom fatigue, how do you solve that problem? So I want you to really be thinking about, what is the problem that I'm solving for? Not just all the stuff that Jen said was going to be hard or challenging or complicated, but what's the problem that I need to solve for my team? And frankly, if each and every one of you can just get to a point by the end of the day where you can confidently say, like, the big problem I have, or maybe it's the 2 problems that I have that I really need to be focused on, and I really need to put attention to, are A, B, C. That's going to be a good starting point for you to be able to go take some action. So I'm going to throw a bunch of information at you. It's just information. You need to know what the problem you're solving for is. So keep that in mind as you go through. So if anyone has a thought to that and wants to just drop that in right out of the gate, what is the big problem that you're solving for? Go ahead and chat it. If you need to reflect on it and think about it, that's fine. I get that. But I want to make sure each of you is really solving for the correct layer of the onion for you. Maybe you're the core, maybe you're 3 peels back. I don't know. But all of us have different problems and situations for ourselves when it comes to this remote challenge. Okay, so we've kind of thrown a bunch of things that makes it hard out there. But this sort of secondary question is, what is the big difference between in-person management and remote management? I would love to get some thoughts. So what do you think are some of the big differences between in-person and remote management? And I'd like to keep us away from maybe the more obvious. I think we all know, we're not physically together, or we're going to have to do a call over Zoom, or, those are the things that are obvious. We know that. What are the other things? Is there anything else that's really different between in-person and remote management? And I'm a coach, so I could sit silently here all day long. Employees are ghosting us much more often, not just responding to reach outs. It's hard to manage. That ghosting thing, it's funny you mentioned that, Erica. That is something I keep hearing from individuals a lot lately. I actually had someone tell me the other day that they've had employees ghosting in the sense of just stop showing up to work and not even resign anymore, just like stop showing up. And I mean, this is definitely in pockets of areas, but it's just something interesting. More focus on results kind of goes back to that boundaries thing a little bit, right? That's tough. Like, of course we can do more. We have more time and all of these things. Can't read the room, body language, seeing the faces. Yep. Taking emails the wrong way. It is so easy to misinterpret certain communication. This is the example of, please go through and read all these if you aren't as they go, because there's some really great stuff on here. What is your challenge? When we go back to that, what is your challenge? What do you need to solve for? I would be willing to bet you probably saw something in there that wasn't on your radar or on your list before, and grab it for you. Because there's some really good stuff in here, some great nuggets. There was one more I wanted to scroll up and see. Oh yeah, so Katie said more asynchronous communication when remote. Personally, I think that's one of those amazing new benefits of the remote, is how we can start to learn to be a little bit more asynchronous and do that a little bit better. So giving an example, just in case you're thinking, well, how does that apply, or what does that really mean in this work setting? We have a Google Doc that's shared. Justice and I are working on right now. We have a Google Doc out there where we're sharing it. He's putting comments in, I'm putting comments in, someone else is changing it. Everyone's in there live when it works for them to work on the file. So we don't have to all get together at the exact same time to have a meeting, but we can kind of do some of the work outside of a meeting. It's not going to work for everything, but it's definitely a good tool in the toolbox. Not easy to have really difficult conversations and address performance issues. Yeah, feedback might be tough. Like, even if you feel like you give really good feedback, or you give really good, like radically candid feedback, sometimes it just, you gotta wonder, like, is it sinking in the same? Does it feel the same? It's tough to know that. Okay, so these are all really, really great, and I want you to remember all of these as we segue into the next slide. I don't want to, because I'm just sort of setting you up here for actually I'm going to go one more and then I'm going to go backwards. Remember how I said in the beginning, there's one thing that I want you to know. This is the time where you get to say, Jen, I completely disagree with you if you want. But what I want to say is, leading a team in person and leading a team remotely requires the same skills. As a manager, you need the same skills. You need to be able to provide effective feedback. You need to be able to show up as a coach. You need to be able to delegate. You still need to be able to do all of those same things. So what I want you to be thinking about is, you've got your list of, okay, what's that stuff that makes it challenging for me, as you're writing all those challenging things down. Do you agree with this? Is it the same skills to manage your team in person as it is to manage your team remotely? We've identified a lot of nuances as how things might be tweaked or tailored, or we may have to adjust or adapt. I've got the pink crown for in-person. I've got the gold crown for remote. We know things are going to look and feel a little bit different, but for the most part, those key core leadership skills and qualities are going to be very similar or the same. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. I'm going to go back 2 slides. How will you know you've improved in your skills? This is a general, vague question, but think of it from the context of, how are you going to know that you are successfully managing a remote team? So here we are today, we're all talking about how we want to be better at this. If I asked you a month from now, are you now successful at managing a remote team? How are you going to measure that? How are you going to measure that? What does that look like for you? This is not an easy question to answer, but as you get your list together, right? Here's my challenges. Here are those skills that I might need to work on. How am I going to measure that? Think through what that might look like for you. So Susan says results, which I think is makes perfect sense. Results make great, but what if you can't measure it? Like, what if it's not as simple as 5 people came to work today, 6 people came to work tomorrow? I don't know. I had my rate of ghosting went from 10 per month to 8 per month. I don't know, maybe we can measure some of those things, but sometimes it's hard to measure some of that. So it might be a feeling, it might be an emotion, but the more you can document or think through what that might look or feel like for you, the closer you're going to be able to get to reaching and achieving that. So this is no different than if you're working with a coach and we sit down and like, what are the goals we want to work toward? How are we going to measure them so that we can really keep an eye and keep a pulse on where we're at and how we're progressing? I think this is a big reason a lot of individuals in leadership don't feel like they're succeeding as well on their own, because they don't have that sounding board. They haven't documented goals for themselves. They aren't focused on their own personal, what's in it for me, selfish career development. They're so focused on just results or their people. It could be really either. It could be either, but it's not necessarily on themselves. So what are those ways that you are going to measure your own success? So I want you to think about that as we go through the context of some of this today. Karen has a really great point on positive feedback. What I want to highlight right here when we think about positive feedback is, what are you comparing it against? So are you going to be able to receive some positive feedback 6 months from now and know that there was an improvement from before? How are you going to do that? Will you pull up the old positive feedback and compare it to the new positive feedback? Is it that Bob gave me bad feedback before, but Bob gave me good feedback today? Like, how specific do you need to get for yourself, and what might that look like? So even when we have something that feels as easy as saying positive feedback, how do we know? How do we actually measure it? Okay, and it's not always easy. So I just am sort of challenging you with that thought to put the bug in your ear. All right, so I'm going to skip back forward. All right, so now we're into those 4 kind of key components that were mentioned as the things we were going to talk about within the workshop today. So maintaining culture and connection was the first one. And one of the key things that I want to point out here is maintain. It's all in the word right there, maintain. So what does it take to maintain the culture you had before? What does it take to maintain the level of connection you had before? And this might be another one of these like good exercises for yourself to sit down and write down. These are great things that you would work on with a coach. We come in and said, okay, the way I used to connect with people was A, B, C, but I'm a little bit stuck on what it might look like going forward. Your coach could probe, ask you questions, help you document something, and get a little bit of, how do I get from like here to here? Because I'm trying to keep it simple for today. Maintain it. So if it doesn't exist, you're going to have to build it, which is a whole other conversation. If you've lost it over the last, 18 months? Goodness, 18 months? How do you go back to what was there before? There's a couple great workshops. And if you come to the one I'm doing this evening too, I talk about level setting. And when I talk about level setting, I just remind everyone that as a leader and as a manager, it's okay to just stop where you're at and say, hey, we just got a level set, regardless of what the topic is, whether it's a process, a system, a tool, culture, connection, whatever it is. It's time to level set. Where are we at right now as a group, and where do we want to be? So just taking that moment to stop and really think about, how do we get back to or maintain where we're already at? If you feel like there's a chance that your culture or connection with your team is starting to slip, this is another good time where you get the team together. Ask them, what do you need? What do you want? How do you feel? How would you rate connection on a scale of 1 to 10 on where we're at? Let's say they all say 5. Great. How are we going to get from a 5 to an 8? Ask them that. How are we going to get, this is a coaching question, right? How are we going to get from a 5 to an 8? What's it take to go up 3 notches, 3 points? See what they have to say. You as a manager, anyone who's attended any of my workshops before know I always say, as a manager, we have these weights. We have these weights on our shoulders, and we feel like we have this sort of like burden of the world and the pressure to have all the answers, and we have to know everything, and we have to give direction, all this kind of have to, woulda, shoulda, heavy weights of a manager. I give you permission. You take the weights off. The weights can come off. It's a team. Think of it from a servant leader perspective. It's about the group. Ask them. They have the answers. They have great perspective. You do not have to come up with all of the decisions and the answers. You want to have a healthy culture, ask team how you're going to have a healthy culture. This is another reason why that whole concept of, and you're going to hear me talk about it a lot, showing up as a coach. I mean, this is like the number one thing from a leadership perspective we at Ama La Vida do with our managers is we coach them on how to show up as a coach. We want you to coach your team along the way. Ask them the questions. Do not just assume you have to have the answers. Pull it out, work together, collaborate. Okay, so the second bullet, what worked in person? How can I apply it in the virtual setting? I think this is another thing that we forget. We just kind of go, well, water cooler chat doesn't exist anymore. It's over. Well, how can we create it? I don't know. I mean, I don't have all of the answers. I can tell you a lot of things that others have done, and I would love if people could start dropping in the chat. How have you made it easy to have ad hoc meetings? How have you created an open door policy? How have you created water cooler chat? Start dropping in there. I know there was a lot of you who said you're doing a better job or a same job that you were in person managing your team. What are you doing? Start typing it in the chat. We want to see it, even if it takes you a while to type because it's a big paragraph. Put it out there. But here's some examples of things I've heard from others. Open office hours meetings. So I have a 1 hour Zoom meeting on my calendar where I log in and anyone is just welcome to drop in. They're welcome to drop in. They can ask questions. We can just sit there and work quietly at the same time just to feel like we're connecting with someone. Some people have actually gone in and scheduled, 15-minute daily stand-ups, more frequent one-on-ones. If that's the priority, make it the priority. I know it's hard. Time is crunched. But what can you get rid of? What can you remove that's maybe not as important? Maybe there's meetings on your calendar or activities that you're doing that are a little bit overcome by events, but we just have done them for so long, we've forgotten to take them off. So get rid of that junk that you no longer need to do. Team chat channel. Yeah, Slack. Use your tools, your resources, Teams, Slack. I think Google has one too. There's so many of them, right? There's all these different ones that we can do. We also have open hours, water cooler talks bi-weekly, taking time to talk about non-work things. Love it. Pizza parties where we have food delivered to each person's house and we join Zoom, chat, and hang out. What a wonderful idea. So many great ideas. I've heard of teams doing things where they took their team on a tour around their house. Because, when would you ever see your coworkers home, possibly? So that's like a fun way to build some of this connection and that relationship building piece and collaborate. Justice ran a couple great happy hours for us. One where he had us all send in baby pictures and we had to guess who was who. That was a lot of fun. Brittany, another person on our team, she created something called just simply ALV Happiness Hour. And it's just an hour on our calendar where we were all encouraged to not work and to go get some fresh air outside. And then we shared pictures of what we did with our 1 hour. It was August and it was sweaty here, so I did some indoor workouts, but others went outside and walked around and then sent in lovely pictures of what they did. So there's so many creative things that we can do. We can get really creative with this. Sometimes it's just that moment. I go back to that level set. We just got to stop and remind ourselves, like, we got this, we can do this, we can get creative. And we can ask others. We can ask our team, what will work for them? What do they need? What do they want? If you happen to work at a larger company too, where you maybe have a peer or another manager that you've seen that's clearly doing things really well, like it's just clicking, it's working, have a little networking session with them, an informational interview session with them. What are they doing that's working so well? And how could you replicate or duplicate some of that? The other thing I want to mention kind of before we move on to the next topic is just around this kind of culture piece again. I mentioned the maintain culture versus create, because create sort of means starting over from scratch. But if you haven't done a simple exercise where you've thought through, what do I want the culture of this team to look and feel like? That's a really great reflective exercise too. It's also a really good one you can do as a team, where you can say, hey, what do we want our team culture to look like? Because when you're having that conversation, it might really bring out a lot of these ideas for these simple, easy little things to do a lot more naturally. Sometimes it's hard to just sit there and go, oh gosh, like how can we collaborate more? What might that look like? And then you feel like you're forcing it. And oh, I just dumped a meeting on someone's calendar. It's just another meeting to go to. It doesn't feel right. But if we all get together and we talk about it with a different lens and we kind of put on that, what type of culture do we want to have? And you show up as a coach for your team right there and you ask those deep, genuinely curious questions. What type of culture do we want to have? How do you want to feel every day? What needs to change for you to love what you're doing? How do we move from, again, that 5 to 8 or whatever on the scale? What are those questions that you could be asking your team to hopefully create something a little bit more naturally that will closer get you there? Okay, if there's anyone that has anything else they want to say around maintaining culture and connection, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. I'm going to go on to the next one. I'm seeing just so much great stuff. Let's see, Katie's got something here. If I work from home and seeing something funny at my neighbors, just messaging a coworker to tell them the story, like I would do if we were in the office. Exactly. I think that's a great idea. It's so funny you mentioned that because I have a window right here and we back up to a green belt. And it just so happens that right now there is a worker out there doing some weed whacking. So hopefully you can't hear it. It's a little distracting for me, to be honest. But no one is ever back there. So I'm like, I see this little white hat going back and forth and there's someone back there right now. So totally weird. And you know, these things kind of shake up your day a little bit too. They allow you to kind of pause, whether it's I'm having a giggle from it or it's just like, you'll never believe what just happened. Sometimes we need that to break up the day and to create just some good natural connection. All right, so the next one I'm going to move on to is this one component of influence. So influence through distance was one of the bullets that we had on there. And this is a little wordy, so I apologize, but I wanted to put a little bit of a definition in here as we think about influence, because sometimes I think that word has the wrong sort of definition attached to it, or maybe has a misrepresentation of what we should do or how we should create influence. So the definition simplistically is the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. Okay, so hopefully you can dissect kind of what that means. My additional statement is just, I want you to think of it as creating followers, not as manipulation, because sometimes those words sort of get a little bit too connected, manipulation and influence. Like, oh, if I'm influencing, maybe I'm manipulating people's ideas and thoughts. And that's not really what it's about. It's about how are you showing up in a way that you are hopefully impacting behaviors or character or thought, you know. So what are those things that you are doing that might create those followers? Okay. So the reason I think that definition is important is because how we do it and what that looks like changes when we think about creating followers versus when we think about manipulating people to do what I want them to do. So if you're a manager who's in that mindset of like, I can't get my people to do what they need to do, that's a different problem. That's probably delegation issue. That's probably accountability issue. It might be definition of roles and responsibilities. It might be confusion or lack of clarity around the communication of a message. Those are things you can work on with your coach. So if you're watching this slide right now going, oh, well, I'm bummed. I thought she was going to talk about how to get my team to get things done when they can't get things done. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I want you to write that down as something that you could work on with your coach, because there's a lot of very unique leadership skills you can dive into to getting your team to do what you need them to do. Influence through distance. I really want you to think about this a little bit more as, again, having your coaching hat on, showing up as a coach. This is now, well, I don't know, the millionth time I've mentioned it, showing up as a coach. So are you actively listening? Are you really actively listening to what others are saying and understanding and receiving that information? So how can you influence someone? How can you support individuals? And how can you create followers if you don't even really know what their challenges are, what their problems are, what's making them stuck? You kind of can't. So it's this listening piece is kind of simplistically step one. And I'm not going to get a ton into active listening today. It's one of the components of our leadership program, Elevate, that we run our leaders through, because again, I go back to like, we coach our leaders to show up as coaches. But what I want you to think about with active listening is this concept of passive versus active. So, okay, what does that mean, Jen? Like passive is you're just listening to hear. So I walk in the room, oh my gosh, I've had such a hard day. And you say, oh, me too. I got up at this time. So you heard what I said. You heard me say I had a hard day, but you're just responding at that point. You're listening to respond. You're responding in the way that feels good to you, which is, I also had a bad day. That is most of normal conversation. And that's very natural. It's not that that's really bad. That's how you talk to friends. That's how you talk to family. But if you are having a manager and employee relationship, if they're coming to you and they're trusting you to say, I'm having a really bad day, they probably need a little bit more of that empathy and that listening than they need of that, yeah, me too type of concept. So just be thinking about that. How can you kind of shift away from that passive and move into that active listening? So employee comes in, I'm having a really bad day. Maybe the response is something like, I'm really sorry to hear that. I know that's really tough on you. What are some of the things that we can talk about that help you get through this? Or what are the specific challenges you're having and how can we work through them? But you're putting that more coaching mindset on. You're asking some questions, you're looking for more information, and you're hoping to get to a point of support and help without just saying, how can I help you? Because that might feel like you don't care. You're sort of pushing the individual off. Like, yeah, it's a question, but there's not a lot of care and heart in that question. Be genuinely curious. It's that perfect segue from the listening to the curiosity. So what are those questions that you can be asking others so that you can make sure you have this opportunity to, again, I go back to influence, to create followers. I have this other bullet on here, be educated. I mean, what I think is important to note about this is when we really want to influence others, even think about it as like, I get this question all the time too. This is a bit of a shift, but how can I have great leadership presence? How can I have gravitas? You know, people want to just like, they want to be known for something. Well, it's a combination of a lot of things. There's a piece of confidence in there, right? And we can work on confidence and build and grow confidence. And you can do that with your coach. But there's also this component of competency. Competency. I mean, think about someone you know who is just really smart and says really powerful, well thought out things, or asks just really good questions that gets you thinking deeply. Those are the people you want to follow. Those are the people that you want to follow. And when you think about it that way, it's easy. It's, oh yeah, that's Bob. Bob is always saying those things that just really get me thinking. And he's so smart and it motivates me, or it makes me want to do more, or I'm curious what the next thing he's going to say is, or it makes me want to know what he's buying, who he's investing in, what company he's working at, whatever it is. But something that Bob's doing in his form of being overly educated about stuff is making you want to follow him. Okay. So trying to kind of keep it real simple. How can you create followers? What can you do for your team? How can you show up for your team that they're going to want to follow you? That frankly, no matter what you say, they're going to go, all right, sounds good. Let's do it. Like, what does that look like for you? It's probably this be educated. It's this active listening. It's this genuine curiosity. There are a bunch of other components of it, but I want to give you a starting point. Okay, so kind of just curious, we haven't had a lot of chat in a while, so drop some things in the chat. When you see be educated, when you see actively listen, and when you see genuinely curious related to creating followers and influence, which one of those would you say you have the most personal opportunity to work on? Is there any one piece that stands out the most for you? And just drop that in the chat. I think for me, because active listening and genuine curiosity are such key components of coach, I always revert to be educated. I know I want more information, because the more information I have, the more I can share and the more I can sort of span out and influence others that way. So for me, it's probably be educated, but I mean, all of us are a little bit different. Curiosity would help me grow. Oh, it's so true. We don't talk about it a lot here, but I keep mentioning this concept of we coach our managers to show up as coaches. Well, the main reason why is because as managers, again, with those weights, we have to have the answers. We have to have the solution. Tell you right now, you do not have to have the solution. You don't have to know everything. It helps to be educated and know a lot of good stuff. It's great that you can, but you don't have to know it all. And the opposite of that would be that curiosity. So employee comes in, I have a problem. Will you solve it? You could probably solve it. I bet there's a lot of people who just tell the employee the answer right there, because that's our natural instinct. Employee has problem, I solve problem. Employee has problem, I solve problem. That's not what we need to be doing. We need to be genuinely curious. We need to ask questions so that we can empower them to go and figure it out on their own, to grow, to develop, and then hopefully to success and be us someday as we grow off and do something else. So that, again, that process of showing up as a coach is just so powerful. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one because, again, we could spend a week on all this content. Leading effective meetings was the third bullet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but you will get a copy of this right here, how to communicate to be heard and understood. You'll get a copy of this in the follow-up. This is simply just our 4-step framework for how to communicate to be understood. And if I were to just read these bullets, prepare, deliver, summarize, follow up, you'd go, yeah, duh, that makes sense. There's nothing shocking there, right? But the reason I have it up here related to meetings is because I really want you to be thinking about, prior to every meeting, what do I actually need to do to make it better? And maybe even like the question is, why is it not effective now? Is it not effective because it's not organized? Is it not effective because no one knows what their actions are at the end? Like, what makes it effective or not effective for you? Is it not effective because there's too much chitter chatter? You know, what is going on that's making it ineffective? Go back to that thing I said at the very beginning. We need to know what the problem is so that we can solve the problem. So be clear for yourself when it comes to leading effective meetings. What is my problem? Then you can work on solving it. So if anything comes to mind as you're thinking through this now, drop that in the chat. What is the problem that I have with meetings, or why are my meetings not effective? Even if it doesn't feel like it's something you can control, drop it in anyways, because sometimes that's a good starting point. Most likely to control of it. But I put the framework up because I really want you to think through preparing in advance. So have an agenda. Have an agenda. Make sure that you have a clear approach. Everyone knows why we're going into this meeting. So yeah, you made an agenda. Do you also need to communicate the agenda so that everyone else can be prepared? You know, who's going to be there? Who do you need to prepare in advance of the meeting to make sure that they're on your side? Who do you need to invite that's not invited? Like, so prep can be a lot of components. It can even be prepping for, oh man, Bob's going to be there and Bob triggers me every time. He always asks these hard questions that drive me crazy or get me emotional or whatever it is. If you know you have a trigger person, how do you prep for them? If the CEO is going to be there and you know they're going to ask A, B, C, D questions, how do you get prepared for the answers? So thinking through what can happen in advance, you can also think of it as like that pre-mortem, that pre-post-mortem, doing the post-mortem process, but in advance. What are all the things that could go wrong that I need to account and change for? Okay, so just kind of thinking about it from that perspective. So how can I be more prepared? Stephanie says too many communication tools, pinging everyone, Teams, Outlooks, instant message. Exactly. So maybe this is the problem as well, right? There's just too much. It's like going into Costco, analysis paralysis, overload. Like, how do we narrow it down? What do we really need to focus on? If we stop and we level set, what do we really need to do to make this work? Because yeah, it's hard to keep up. There's a lot going on. Like, what do we really need to zone in on and center in on? But again, if you don't, until you know the problem, is going to have a hard time solving it. Delivery, summarize. The key things in these being like, make sure you're not adding a lot of fluff. You're just being very clear, specific, making it digestible, checking for understanding, making sure everyone really understands the message that you're saying. How many times have you been in a meeting? I use this example all the time, but how many times have you been in a meeting where you're all in the meeting, message is delivered, we leave the meeting, and it seems like everyone goes off and goes a different direction? It's like, wait a minute, weren't we just all in that same meeting, solving that same problem with that same process? How are we all going down different paths right now? That just doesn't even make sense. Very easy for that to happen. So just really making sure we're all on the same page, summarizing, paraphrasing, and checking for understanding to know what was said and what was important, including action items and all of that. Follow-up is that last piece. I just always like to remind everyone that it's probably the most underrated and not done. I'm sure there's a better way to say that. It's a thing we don't do that we should do. So, hey, meeting today was great. Here are the notes from our conversation. Bob committed to doing this. Jen committed to doing this. Sally committed to doing this type of thing, just so we have something as an accountability tool to keep us accountable. So you'll get a copy of this. We also have a really great template for how to host effective one-on-one meetings. If anybody wants that one-on-one meeting one as well, they can let us know and we'll drop that in. Okay, relationship building. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this just because we've talked about it in a lot of the other components, especially dug into a bit in that culture and connection section. But I think what's really important is the first and the last bullet that you see right there. Carve out time for it. Carve out time for it. It's just so easy for us to get busy and not make relationship building a priority. But if we aren't having great one-on-ones, if we aren't learning what our people need, if we aren't removing those manager shackles and asking questions and being genuinely curious, if we aren't making a priority for that, we're never going to get anywhere. There's no like take a pill and remote teaming works really well. There's take a lot of slow vitamins with some nurturing and some, muscle lifting and all of these things, right? It's this process of using all of these tools together and creating healthy long-term habits. Okay. I have this comment on here too, make it two-way. It kind of goes back to not only the coaching question piece, but just dialogue in general. Are you doing all the talking? Because if so, just start being silent and listening a lot more. Challenge yourself to be silent, pause and listen a lot more and just see what happens. Like what comes out of that. But we want the dialogue to be back and forth. It's not just you telling everyone else. Be prepared. I mostly just mean kind of like this last bullet back here, making sure you're prepared in advance for conversations. So if you ask someone for their time, do you have an agenda or have you told them what you want to talk about? Or is it just, oh, I really want to talk to Sally. And then you get in a room. I don't really know what to talk about, Sally, but I wanted your time. Sally's busy. So make sure you're valuing and respecting her time too. So that's all I mean about that. Just to make sure you can really maximize the opportunity. Okay. All right, so remember how I said there was going to be one more at the end, the one more thing you need to know. And that's really walk the walk, do as I say, do as I do. I think this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that managers make right now, especially in this remote environment. Let me give you some examples. I think it's really important that all of you have your camera on right now so we can collaborate. Sorry, I didn't take a shower today, so I need to turn my camera off. I'm not doing as I do. I'm not following through the same thing I asked you to do. I'm not doing it myself. So if you're asking individuals to do things, do it yourself as well, okay? Do as I say, do as I do. And this goes way beyond my simple little Zoom example. If you say you're gonna do something, do it. If you say log off by 5, but you don't do it yourself, do it. If you tell them not to send emails on the weekend and you send emails on the weekend, do it. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Just write the word boundaries up across and you need to live to the same boundaries that you're asking them to live to. You are trying to be supportive and encouraging and telling your team, I really want you to get rest. I really want you to relax. Are you doing that for yourself? And if you're not, what is the reason you're not doing it? Are you making a lot of assumptions that your manager wouldn't want you to do the same thing? Or has your manager told you you need to work harder than them? Well, maybe that's a different problem. These are great things you can work on with your coach as well. What are the boundaries that you really need to be living into for yourself so that you can walk the walk? Okay. All right. So really the big question is, what's the real challenge for you and your team? Boundaries, just talked about that. Working too much. We've created silos. We're all sitting around in yoga pants. Nobody turns on the camera. We don't meet enough. There's too much silence. We don't communicate well. We don't asynchronously communicate at all. What is the real challenge that you have? And what is the problem that you're solving for? Now, as we've gone through today and we've seen some different things pop up on these slides, I would love to hear how individuals would identify their own personal challenge or challenges if you have more than one. So please type a couple of them in the chat and let me know what your challenges for you and your team are. It's always hard for the first one to go out, but I'm going to tell you right now, please share, because as soon as you share, someone else will share. You're going to influence and inspire others to follow. And that's kind of what we all need right now. We just need to know that we all have a challenge. So what is one of the challenges about remote teaming, the real challenge for you and your team right now? I know for me, it's boundaries. I mean, 100% it's boundaries. I get up early and I get right on the computer. Maybe sometimes I forget and send some emails in the evening, and shouldn't do that because I don't want others to have that pressure of, oh, Jen sent an email, I got to read this now. Working in silos, short staffing, overworking. Yeah. And these aren't easy problems to fix. But what are some of those things that we can be doing? Oh, Katie, boundaries. Today's my day off and I worked for an hour this morning. Yeah. I think I do that every weekend. It's such a shame. And I know, and I'm telling you all these things. I know it's not right, right? So we all have our own challenges. What's important to remember about this too, as we go through this, is you might be thinking about it for yourself. You might be thinking about it for your team. But if you are in your own mode right now, like a lot of this is resonating just for you personally, like, oh, I got to work on boundaries. Oh, I'm working too much, whatever it is. Guarantee you everyone on your team is having the same thoughts and the same feelings. Their words might be different. The challenges they have might be different. They might have a challenge that they have a homeschooler that keeps coming in and asking for answers to questions. That would be another one I have right here. So we got to remember we're not alone. We're going through this together. So what can you do to stop, level set, have that conversation with your team around culture and start working through that? How do you determine priorities? Real challenge when you're getting a lot of different problems shared by team members. This is a great question. I mean, I would argue that they're probably all problems. So then how do you just prioritize them and focus on the ones that maybe need to be focused on the most? Or how do you make it more individual and you do it just one-on-one? Everyone picks one for just them and you focus on just the one for them. Maybe everyone gets one-on-one and we have one as a team. I don't know. Could get creative with that. But I would turn that question around. For you, Erica, think about like if your best friend came to you and said, oh my gosh, I have some, my team is coming to me. They have all these problems. What should I do? How do I solve them? Like, what would you tell your best friend to do? I know it's not that I'm trying to like simplify it for the context for today, but like, what would you tell your best friend to do? And think through if that might work for you. Sometimes that's a good trick. Okay, so we already talked about the how I know when I've improved my skills. I want you to just make sure you have that question written down for yourself so that you can kind of remind yourself of what I said. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I was going to kind of circle back at the end and talk a little bit too about how we can support. And this is my last slide, so just real easy. Justice had kind of thrown up the link for scheduling a consult, which is also down here again. That's really just for if you are like, I just want to work on some stuff just for me, just for myself, just all me. You're welcome to schedule that conversation. You'll probably get to talk with the lovely Justice. And you can use the context of today's conversation to frame out what those challenges are and what you might like to do. Okay. The other thing, I have this link, you'll see it on the top left here, this corporate inquiry one. This is more of a form that you can just fill out specifically that says, hey, my company might be interested in a workshop similar to what you did, or we're struggling with boundaries. We'd like a workshop on boundaries. It's just more about that corporate facing. So if you have some budget that you want to use with your team or your corporation, that's a great opportunity to take advantage of that. And that will just get us some information where we can answer some questions for you and talk about designing something for you. But I really do want all of you to think about what are those things that you can be doing to both set yourself up individually, like be a little selfish in your leadership growth and development, and your team as well. Left you with a lot of really powerful questions today. So I sincerely hope that you will go back and reflect on those things. And even if it didn't all sink in immediately today, shoot me an email. Say, hey, Jen, I thought about it more, and here's a question or here's a thought. You're welcome to circle back and bring some things up. Okay, so that's all I have to share, but I'm going to leave this on my screen. I just want to encourage you again. If you think there'd be a good fit for your corporation or you have questions on pricing for workshops and things, just go ahead and fill that corp inquiry out. If you know you're ready to do some one-on-one coaching just for you and you're kind of like, I don't need my company involved, I just want to grow myself, that's what the Leader Convo is for, and email me for anything. So I want to make sure we get a chance to get at least a couple questions answered. I think there was one. I'm going to scroll up. Oh, no, that was Kate. Look at that. Look at the self-coaching. Katie is asking questions to Erica. I love it. I'm just going to keep scrolling up. I don't think I missed anything critical. So if anybody has a question that either I missed, pop it in the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute. We do have a couple more minutes. So any questions? I mean, like I said, we covered a lot today. It was a lot of information, and What I wanted you to walk away with is the skills you have as a manager in person are going to be really effective and be the same skills you're going to use remote. You just might have to wear a pink hat instead of a blue hat, or, things are just going to look a little bit different. That's one. And then I want you to be really real about what the challenges actually are. Be as specific as you can. I can't tell you how many times people reach out to us and be like, I want to be a better leader. Well, that's great, but let's get specific. Let's get into the details. Do you need to work on boundaries? Do you need to work on delegation? What's going on? What are those challenges? The more you know those challenges, the more you will be able to successfully work on achieving and accomplishing goals around them. So get really clear for yourself around that. Questions? Oh, Justice, go ahead. I see you came off mute.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen, for that. And just so everyone's aware, this was recorded and it will be sent in a follow-up email, just so don't worry if you didn't retain something or you want to go back and just refresh yourself. So as she mentioned, if anyone's comfortable, if you want to come off mute, turn your camera on. We do have some time here at the end for questions. So feel free to drop in the chat or come on off and talk to us.
There's usually at least one good question for me. Well, we've got just maybe a minute here. So if another question comes up, great. I'd love some last comments in the chat. Maybe like, what's your one biggest takeaway from today? Anyone have an aha moment? Something that they want to circle back to for themselves? What was something you wrote down that you said, yeah, I need to think about that a little more? Whatever it is, just go ahead and share. We'd love to see what that is. I think for me, it's just always that constant reminder of we are greater as all the parts of us, not just one, because there was so much great information in there. So many great comments, thoughts. Hopefully you had a chance to sort of read through other people's perspectives as they came through and soak them in. Influence, yeah. Consistency of walking the walk, especially when it's comparing to boundaries and personal time. I know. We could have done a whole workshop just on walk the walk. Oh my goodness. Communication styles, so true. Yeah, I know. And then every time you change teams or employees, or you hire someone or something happens, we kind of got to start all over again. So we got to be flexible and adaptable and be constantly working on all this stuff. All right, well, hopefully many of you will be having some conversations with Justice, but please do also feel free to send me an email if you just have any questions or follow-up thoughts, and that corporate inquiry, just if you have curiosity on what we do. Like, there's no preconceived notions. It's a simple form you can just fill out and ask a couple questions. All right, well, I hope that all of you have some new perspectives on remote teams and are successful going forward, and wish you all the best of luck. Have a great rest of the week. As Justice said, it's almost the end of the week, which I just still can't believe, but yeah, happy Friday Eve. There you go. Perfect.
There we go. Thank you so much for everyone for attending, and we will see you soon.